and welcome to all the friends of Nizami Ganjavi International Center at this, our special event as a side event to the 75th anniversary of the United Nations. When we met last year in New York, we had a wonderful time in a series of face-to-face meetings, lively debates, informal discussions, getting to know each other personally. Now the world has changed. The pandemic is upon us, and just this morning, I who thought that my country had completely controlled the pandemic, we had no cases yesterday, for instance, one case the day before, all of a sudden there are 31 cases today. The statistics from around the world indicate that either the first wave is continuing or a second wave is coming. One way or another, we must consider ourselves in a continued extraordinary situation. In all these 75 years of the United Nations, this is the first time that the heads of state or government will not be present face to face at the General Assembly in the same place in the world, in New York, at this time of the year. Only the representatives of each country will be presenting their views, and video messages, as I understand, are being presented. This changes the situation very severely, but mercifully, the pandemic has come at a time when technology has made such advances that it is possible for us to meet across vast distances and to have at least the illusion of speaking face to face, even though what we are now opening as the opening session of our side event to the United Nations General Assembly has already been preceded by several very substantive and very rich discussions of thematic nature. And we will be having in this session a plenary where each speaker will speak for a limited time. I would suggest to aim for 8 minutes if you would, and that will probably bring you to 10 minutes, and then we should be able to manage to get through. I will not be asking you questions. I give you entire confidence to come with your view of where the world is at, where the United Nations are at, where we stand with multilateralism. It's a word I myself, I'm not terribly keen on. It makes you think of some sort of polyhedron with many sides, something inert and not alive, rather than a community or a family of nations, which is what I personally would like to see the United Nations become in due time. However, that is the term that we have been using in replacement of the Cold War times, when the world was broadly split into two camps, although even that is really a very imprecise designation, and mercifully it never was either a bipolar or a unipolar world, although there had been obviously and still are very strong centers of power that carry more weight than others, both militarily, economically, and politically. Ladies and gentlemen, we will start this session with a special address by His Excellency Shefik Jaferovic, who is currently chairman of the presidency of Bosnia and Herzegovina. This is a country which many of us will remember as having been disastrously torn by civil war at the time of the collapse of the communist system in Europe, and a country that has managed to bring itself back up to its feet. And we were happy to receive this video message. Roshan, if you would put it on.
Poštovana predsjednice, dame I gospodo, predstavlja mi naročito zadovoljstvo što vam se danas obraćam u okviru rasprave na ovu vrlo važnu temu krize globalnog poretka koji je decenijama čvrsto počivao na multilateralizmu I ekonomskom liberalizmu, a proteklih godina pokazuje ozbiljnu nestabilnost. Pandemija koronavirusa je i definitivno potvrdila da je svijet mali, da ne poznaje ni kontinente, ni države. Virus napada ljude bez obzira ko su, gdje su i jedino mu se možemo uspješno suprotstaviti organiziranom akcijom cijelog čovječanstva. Neupitno je da svijet nikad u svojoj historiji nije bio bogatiji nego danas, da nikad više ljudi širom svijeta nije bilo obrazovano, da različiti krajevi svijeta nisu nikad bili pristupačniji jedni drugima i da nikada više nije bilo slobode i demokratije nego u proteklim decenijama. Sve su to neosporne historijske zasluge liberalnog svjetskog poretka. Ali cilj modernih društava nije imati bolje stanje od onog jučer, već neprestano težiti ka boljem sutra. Nije dakle dovoljan svijet kakav jeste, već mora biti još razvijeniji i slobodniji, sve dok znanje i prosperitet ne budu dostupni svima podjednako. Cijeneći ogroman ekonomski i politički progres koji je ostvaren u svijetu zahvaljujući liberalnom poretku te imajući u vidu sudbonosni značaj multilateralizma u globaliziranom svijetu, trebamo ipak sa dubokim razumijevanjem pristupiti razlozima zbog kojih su navedena dva principa u krizi. Naročito ako imamo u vidu da je ignoriranje i nipodaštavanje kritika koje su bile usmjerene protiv multilateralnih organizacija i liberalnih ugovora samo produbljivalo krizu. Činjenica je da su veliki ugovori o slobodnoj trgovini, pored svih dobrih stvari koje su nosili i sa sobom određene negativne nuspojave koje su imale sudbonosan značaj za milione ljudi. Nakon otvaranja svjetskog tržišta, čitavi industrijski sistemi su propali, što je ostavilo bez posla i učinilo socijalno ranjivom čitavu generaciju radnika. Nakon otvaranja granica i masovnog, naoko nekontroliranog priliva migranata, u razvijenim društvima se pokrenula debata o sigurnosnim i kulturalnim pitanjima kao svojevrsna reakcija na novu stvarnost. Nažalost, dok su zagovornici liberalizma i multilateralizma zadovoljno trljali ruke nad uspjesima globalnog poretka, populizam je prepoznao nove strahove i potrebe ljudi, te je u jednom trenutku počeo diktirati politički ritam. Sutrašnji svijet ne smije biti u znaku populizma, jer složeni problemi sa kojima se svijet suočava zahtijevaju ozbiljna rješenja, a ne privid jednostavnih rješenja kakva nudi populizam. Istovremeno, sudbina sutrašnjeg svijeta zasigurno ne može biti ni u vraćanju na početne postavke, jer se ne mogu i ne smiju ignorirati opravdani strahovi i potreba za zaštitom pred negativnim efektima globalizacije. Sutrašnji svijet treba da bude temeljen na svim onim pozitivnim nasljeđima liberalnog globalnog poretka uz odgovarajuće adaptacije koje će otkloniti strahove tako što će u isti red prioriteta u kojem se nalaze ekonomski progres i produktivna moć staviti i socijalnu sigurnost i efektivnu zaštitu pred nekontroliranom kompetitivnošću. Sutrašnji svijet treba da bude u znaku multilateralnih organizacija koje će biti svjesne da je kredibilitet nešto što se dugotrajno i mukotrpno gradi, a vrlo lako i brzo se može izgubiti. To smo mogli najbolje vidjeti na primjeru nespremnosti Vijeća sigurnosti Ujedinjenih nacija da provodi svoje rezolucije kao recimo tokom rata u Bosni i Hercegovini, tako i danas u brojnim kriznim žarištima, između ostalog i u vezi sa recentnim slučajem povrede teritorijalnog integriteta Azerbejdžana. Realnost današnjice je da multilateralne organizacije još uvijek nemaju dovoljan kredibilitet, ne samo što se tiče rješavanja oružanih sukoba, već i u brojnim drugim sferama. Najsvježiji primjer toga su i najave nekih država da neće nabavljati vakcinu COVID preko Svjetske zdravstvene organizacije. Nesumnjivo da su multilateralne organizacije u svijetu koji počiva na međusobnoj zavisnosti potrebne i na koncu nezamjenjive, jer se zajednički globalni problemi mogu rješavati samo zajedničkim naporima. Međutim, multilateralne organizacije ne mogu legitimirati svoju praksu samo činjenicom da postoji potreba za njihovim postojanjem, već ukoliko žele mandat na određenom polju, moraju pokazati kapacitet za rješavanje problema i moraju pažljivo graditi i čuvati svoj kredibilitet. Ono što preuzmu kao obavezu moraju biti u stanju realizirati. Ako su protekle decenije bile u znaku izgradnje međunarodnih institucija, onda decenije koje su pred nama trebaju biti u znaku izgradnje i reformskog jačanja njihovog kredibiliteta i odgovornosti kako bi na pravi način odgovorile svojoj svrsi, doprinoseći dostizanju univerzalnog prosperiteta i sigurnosti. Zahvaljujem vam na pažnji.
Thank you to Mr. Jaferovic. Do we have President Halonen online?
Just 1 second. I will. Yeah, she's online.
Hello, Tarja. Hello.
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 Yes, nice to meet you. We had difficulties to have a voice from the previous speaker. I hope that
We didn't have it, Tarja, because he was speaking in his own language and we had the subtitles, you see.
Okay.
It wouldn't have helped, I don't think, unless you're a real linguist.
Okay, and so you can hear me now. Okay.
We can hear you lovely. And ladies and gentlemen, I think I do not need to present, but I should, because it's the proper thing to do, to introduce Her Excellency, the former President of Finland, my dear friend Tarja Halonen, a member of the board of the Nizami Ganjavi International Center. A lady has done enormous activities in a variety of humanitarian fields, including the rights of women and human rights altogether, and whom we are delighted to have today among us. Tarja, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. You are always so kind, Vaira. And but it's fantastic to meet you and all the others. And I think you look very healthy. I hope so. That it is fine. So anyway, the COVID-19 pandemic is a very serious issue. It's not only international, it's national, and it's a local issue. It's a personal issue. And overcoming this pandemic and its direct consequences require commitment from the international community, but also from all countries and decision makers, cities, researchers, science community, and private sector alike. And we have had, for instance, in Finland, even we have managed internationally taken pretty well. So we have had all the time these discussions that what should be done is that has been okay, and how to be also working together with others, because this pandemic is not only the health crisis, but it's also the humanitarian and development crisis that threatens to profoundly shake the social, economic, and political foundation, and particularly in already fragile, poor, and conflict-affected states. But this is also in the society the same issue, that those who are most fragile, they have also the most difficult time now. And these effects of the pandemic to poverty, gender equality, and also equality in broader sense, or what it means advancing sustainable peace, could stop the progress achieved in reaching the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. And so in that way, it's questioned the future, but also what we have already reached so far. And this is, I think, also good to remember. Studies show that extreme poverty is rising for the first time in more than 20 years. The number of people experiencing acute hunger may even double. And moreover, the crisis have dismal impacts on the health and safety of women and girls. And we both have worked very much especially concerning the health of the women and girls and adolescents. If we take a few examples about the women's situation, for instance, such kind of thing as the female genital mutilation, what we think that why I speak it now when it's just a question of the COVID-19 pandemic. So it's projected to increase by 2 million cases by 2030 due to the interruption of the anti-FGM programs. So that it's not directly, but it's indirectly causing such kind of the negative effects. And the second, domestic violence against women has been reported to increase in several countries. The United Nations Population Fund, UNFPA, estimates that by 2030, child marriages will increase by 30 million cases. And I'm not only speaking about the other countries, but also in my own country, the family violence has already increased, and we are struggling with this question. But pandemic as such, women are also more affected by the economic consequences of the pandemic, as they work relatively more in the informal economy, especially in developing countries. And the ILO estimates that the income of the people working just in the informal economy will fall by the 81% as a result of the pandemic. And so, however, we can see also, of course, this is more serious in the developing countries, but it's also difficulty in the different parts of the society in all countries. But what I think that is very interesting, that if we compare the big countries and small countries, those we are considered to be strong ones and those which are not so strong. So those countries which have a very strong security based on the arms, so and the military spending has been high, but they have not been so good now struggling against the COVID-19. So I mean that it's time also to see that what we think about the security in modern sense, we have seen now the consequences that what will happen. I think that we will have a discussion. I don't go all the material what I have concerning international collaboration and multilateralism, what we heard already before me with our honorable speaker. And I only say that it's very essential to defend the rules-based international order, which is the backbone of the international predictability, security, and stability. And this is a good way to say during this week when we are normally, Vaira, me, and many others, we are in New York with United Nations, but now we are in different parts of the world. But as we now show, we can keep the contacts. Just very, very shortly said that the Pan-European Commission on Health and Sustainable Development work at the national level, and I'm also representing Finland there, and we try to see what we could do. My own country, Finland, is one of those countries, one of these, I think this morning was 75 countries which try to organize that we will get as soon as possible the effective vaccine against this pandemic, but also so that when it will be said, when it will be received, so this vaccine should be also equally democratically delivered to those countries and people who need it. I think that, sorry, I have spoken too lengthily. You know my weakness to speak a lot, but I'm listening to the others with great interest, and I hope, Vaira, that we will have the most possibility to continue also discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Tarja. I think, ladies and gentlemen, I can remind you of a famous saying of Tarja's that we have never forgotten from one of our board meetings at NGIC. The question rose about what happened to men in countries where women were strong. And Tarja assured us that Finland is a country which has strong women and happy men.
Right.
And that is very reassuring to all of you gentlemen in all countries everywhere. You need not fear strong women like Tarja and some others we know, but men can remain happy nevertheless. I believe we do not have Jeffrey with us as yet, so that I will instead give the floor to Dr. Navid Nabarro from the UK. He is co-director of the Institute of Global Health Innovation and a professor at Imperial College in London, WHO Director General Special Envoy on COVID-19. And Dr. Navarro, we are honored and delighted to have you with us today. The floor is yours.
Excellency, thank you. It is actually an extraordinary privilege, and I mean it, to be with the people who are speaking today. President Halonen, you had an extraordinary impact on me when I came to see you in Helsinki. And Her Excellency Winnie Byanyima, thank you for what I learned from you, particularly in your work in Oxfam and in Uganda. Ismail, lovely to be with you as well. And so thank you. Now I'll be quick. I'm going to talk to you as a public health doctor, but also I'm going to talk to you as somebody who was very involved in the effort to develop the Sustainable Development Goals and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And of course, I'm going to focus on coronavirus. And by the end of these remarks, I hope to have sketched a picture of the societies in the world that I personally believe are going to emerge ahead of the virus, and they're going to be able to hold it at bay. And I'm going to contrast with them with the societies that I think are going to face major problems in the coming months and years. But to help me get there, I need to just give you three different things. I need to give you my narrative about the virus and what it's doing. I need to talk about the networks that are active now in addressing this challenge. And I need to focus on the importance of nurturing collaboration when dealing with a threat like this. The narrative is really about the relationship between humanity and the virus. The virus is dangerous. It's terribly easy to underestimate, so it's cunning, and it's surprising us at all times. I want to stress that the virus is not going away. It's just at the beginning of its journey through the human race, and it's actually turning out to be really nasty for poor people. Poor people are more susceptible. Poor people are more affected by it. Poor people are more hurt by containment measures, and poor people are given least attention in all the discussion about how best to deal with it. Poor countries are being put into a terrible situation, and the rich countries are actually sorting out their economies by bailing out their companies and giving quite substantial support to people who are in trouble. But poor countries are missing out because the resources going to the International Monetary Fund are insufficient, and development aid is being cut, as is support for NGOs. Food systems in poor countries, as we discussed, are already showing that they're insufficient to deal with the challenge. We will probably get at least a doubling of poverty and more than a doubling of malnutrition. And we, of course, are getting massive unemployment throughout the poor world. This is a terrible tragedy, completely underestimated by world leaders. The world has been failed by the current clutch of leaders in the big institutions. And I don't think we've started to understand just what this is going to do to our world. It's not going to be leaders who are going to help countries come through. It's actually going to depend on the people themselves, or people organizing at local level, people organizing at subnational level, and in some cases, people organizing at national level. So the narrative is one of a really, really serious challenge that's just being not understood. Of course, societies can get ahead of this virus. They do have to adapt behavior, just like the world had to adapt behavior to HIV. And some communities have done really well. Other communities are still struggling. We've got a big behavior change challenge on now for 7.7 billion people. It involves physical distancing, face protection, hygiene, self-isolation when sick, protecting those who are most vulnerable, and building basic health services that can actually work. It involves working together on therapies, diagnostics, and vaccines, and recognizing that a vaccine is not going to suddenly come along and solve the problem once and for all. No, it's going to be a struggle. But if we understand what this virus is doing, we can deal with it. But to deal with it, our networks have to be incredibly strong, because hierarchical organizations run in the traditional way in which we've done most structural change in our world, they're not going to work. The hierarchies are failing. The political processes are failing. And it's only going to be possible through networks that are not bounded by the usual structures, that are based on collaborative working. Women will be at the center of these, because women do this much better than men. And altogether, we need to recognize that unless young people can come into leadership positions, we'll have no chance against this virus. So getting youth there and reminding us that it's their world that's going to be damaged by this virus. And we've got to help them actually exercise their leadership. So our role, if we're involved in positions of authority, is to nurture collaboration, to encourage local cohesion, to stimulate national movements for health, for well-being, and for equity, because that's the only way we'll deal with this virus. Otherwise, it's going to get stuck in poor communities, where people live in confined areas, where people have no room to negotiate the conditions under which they work and live. And so getting those movements, focusing on equity is the key. Humanity can beat this virus. But who will come through this well? I'll give you two final suggestions. One, societies that are prepared to take the Sustainable Development Agenda for equity and for sustainability seriously, they have a chance of getting on top of this virus. They're the societies which will respect all people. They're the societies that will value self-determination. They're the societies that will give what's needed for those who are going to defend against the virus, protecting health workers so they don't get sick, so they have resources, enabling poor people to access health care, and ensuring that basic services in society are supporting the people most in need. So number one, I advocate the Sustainable Development Agenda. Number two is societies where systems leadership and people-centered leadership is valued, and where there is a willingness by those in authority to trust their people and people to trust those in authority. Wherever there's authoritarian governance or people treated with disrespect, this virus will win. Wherever there's competition between political leaders trying to politicize the issues around COVID, the virus will win and win well. But where there is real social contract between people and leaders, there's a chance to get ahead of the virus. Just look at the countries that are succeeding. Look at the way they're approaching it. Look at the pattern of leadership. Last point. Systems leadership is not easy. It means having to deal with multiple interconnected issues. It means leaving behind our logos and our identities at the door and working together, putting the problem at the center rather than our organizations at the center. But I think this is where our organizations like the one that's hosting us today can really show us the way. Nizami can actually encourage the kind of leadership that matters. Let's not talk about multilateralism. Let's not talk even about what's going on between heads of government that are squabbling all the time. Let's focus on the power of people, people who believe in the value of the individual and the value of the collective, because those are going to be the societies that win. And we can see it happening already, but we're going to see more and more of it in the coming few years as humanity learns to live with this virus and then learns to deal with the destruction of nature, with deepening inequities, and with climate change, and with the extraordinary imbalances between the sexes, which so dominate so much of our life these days. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nabarro, for a very inspiring and stirring presentation. I understand that we are ready to move on to our next speaker, who is Ms. Winnie Byanyima, a former executive director of Oxfam, and an executive director of an organization, UNAIDS, where you would please help me how you pronounce such an acronym.
UNAIDS.
UNAIDS. I was worried to say it wrong. So from Executive Director of UNAIDS, Madam, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank very much the Nizami Ganjavi International Center for hosting this important meeting. And thank you for inviting me to be a part of this with the panelists whom I so admire, so respect, and have met in different capacities and learned from. I'm Winnie Byanyima. Yes, I did the work of the United Nations to fight and end AIDS. It's a great privilege. It's wonderful to be here. Multilateralism was already under huge strain. Let's be clear, it has not been challenged by COVID. It was already under huge strain because of a range of crises that it couldn't solve. Now, COVID-19 has supercharged all of those crises and has pushed many countries even further into nationalisms that they were already retreating to. But the only way out of COVID, and the only way that people in any country can have the health, the prosperity, the security they seek, is through a progressive multilateralism. We need multilateralism, but it has to be a progressive multilateralism. Here are some things we are seeing. I talked about the nationalism. Anyone pursuing a me-first approach in this context hurts themselves and their country. We see this. We see that it is happening over the vaccines and the medicines for COVID-19. Some richer countries have made deals for hundreds of millions of doses for their people. But in such a vaccine nationalism, race, the only winners are the handful of big pharmaceutical companies that own the technology. Instead, we want agreement that when a vaccine against the coronavirus is discovered, it's available free of charge to everyone, everywhere, at the same time. And it's possible, but it's only possible if we share the knowledge, so that the vaccine is produced in vast quantities by many manufacturers in different regions. It's possible. It's the political will that's not there. We have called it a people's vaccine. In my group of allies we've pulled together to fight for this. We call it a people's vaccine. And together with partners, we are calling on all to make it a reality by joining and contributing to the solutions the WHO is leading on this. The CTAP, that is the COVID Technology Access Pool, the COVAX, and all the work under the ACT Accelerator. We're calling on countries to play in there and not to play out. Now, I want to put on the table some of the things we are learning and that I feel would inform a new and progressive multilateralism. One is obviously the principle of a healthy life for all people everywhere. I think it could never have been more clear than now, that health is a human right and that we cannot live in the myth that you can provide health for some and leave others, and that anyone is safe when others are not safe. So this is a principle. The universal access to medicines, equal access to medicines, to vaccines. This is a principle that should underpin a multilateralist system. Then the other principle that is emerging and is a clear learning that we must build into a progressive multilateralism is to building the care economy, a caring society. We have a system where care is undervalued, and care is the work of mainly women and girls. And care has become the work of underpaid migrants, even illegal migrants, forcing forms of migration that are unsafe and that almost equal to actually modern day slavery, all because care is not valued and given its true reward in our global economy. So we need to solve that in a new multilateralism. Third, business cannot continue to be business as usual. We have to reinvent what good business is. It can't continue to be right that if you dodge your taxes, that if you pay people poverty wages, you are doing good business and you are respected in the world because you give your shareholders a lot of money, but you underpay workers, you treat women as slaves at the end of your supply chain. We have women in Far Eastern countries who are peeling shells of shrimps, 9 hours standing without a break and earning a poverty wage. We have women in the factories that make our clothes, burning under the roasting sun, getting paid a few dollars a day, fired when they are pregnant, not given any sick leave. I mean, these are the conditions of work that give us the goods we buy. This has to change. The supply chains must change. Business must be defined differently in a new multilateralism. Profits must be made, but not at the cost of the lives of the majority. Then jobs, education, social life, a new definition of work, a work that is dignifying and that gives people the healthy lives that they want, meaningful. And lastly, resources. We must now see this as the opportunity in the multilateral system to control the way resources are made and taken out of countries. I'm talking about tax reform. This is how countries will have the money they need to guarantee human rights, including the right to life, the right to health, only if production within countries is taxed fairly and resources left there for their own development, not this leaking global corporate system. Lastly, debt. I think my friend David Nabarro talked about this, that the poor countries are being left behind. They have no fiscal space to fight corona and address all the other challenges. Aid is being cut, debt is mounting, not enough relief. We need to put in instruments to put good, deep, longer lasting debt cancellation and relief, as well as a new way to manage lending and borrowing of countries. And the last point is the governance. We really have to accept, as you said in opening remarks, there's a credibility in the governance of gap in the governance of multilateralism. And it is now we must accept that it's collapsing, literally, until we come back and reconstruct the governance so that it represents the way the world is today. There's equality, there's fairness, there's diversity and inclusion. We will not have a progressive multilateralism. Those are my points, and I think they are all lessons from this crisis. And we can fight and bring new learnings and build a new multilateralism. Thank you so much. Sorry if I took too long.
Thank you very much. No, you did an excellent overview of all the ills that confront humanity after 75 years of the United Nations. And I think that in many ways what you have outlined as thematics could serve as a guideline for the United Nations for the next decades in terms of things that need to be tackled and that need to have solutions found. Your presentation has followed nicely on Dr. Navarro's, and I think we were now ready to make an even more severe jump. And our next presenter is Dr. Jean Baderschneider from the United States of America. She is a remarkable woman, a former VP of Global Procurement, ExxonMobil. This is a remarkably high position in the business world that she has achieved. And we now find her as CEO of the Global Fund to End Modern Slavery, a person of multiple facets, of multiple interests and talents. Dr. Baderschneider, we are anxious to listen to you.
Thank you, Madam President. I'm overwhelmed by the comments so far and really enjoying this. Hello, everyone. It is a real privilege to be with you today, along with my esteemed colleagues on the panel, most esteemed and the most honorable members of the Nizami Ganjavi International Center, which is a great privilege for me to participate in, led by our wonderful president. We're here today to not only take stock of the global challenges we face, but to consider how we can seize the moment to rethink social protections and rebuild our economies and communities. We must take these challenges head on, not just study them, but take them head on and galvanize global action, I think, along a number of streams. The COVID-19 pandemic is the latest in a series of global trends threatening globalization as we know it. We were already grappling with a world order that has left millions of people behind. This pandemic has further exposed and exacerbated the deep inequalities, injustices, and tensions that threaten to unravel our social fabric and put those most vulnerable at greater risk. We have seen the rise of nationalism and authoritarian populism contributing to a backlash against both labor mobility and free trade. Further complicating this trend, shutdowns due to COVID-19 have limited movement of goods and labor, leaving more and more people in increasingly desperate situations. In this context, ensuring the welfare of workers, migrants, and the most vulnerable must be foundational as we begin to rebuild, or we end up in the cycle of collapse and rebuild, collapse and rebuild, collapse and rebuild every time there's a global shockwave. So let's just focus on migration for a minute to highlight one example of significant vulnerability. There are over 270 million migrants, which would be a very large country, and this number is expected to grow due to climate change, conflicts, and other shocks and crises. Of these migrants, there are an estimated 164 international workers. Many are employed in industries with high prevalence of forced labor. For example, 67 million in domestic work, 75 million in the apparel sector. Oftentimes, these workers in these industries are unskilled or low skilled and highly vulnerable to exploitation. These global migration trends and the risks that millions of workers face was a reality before the pandemic. And last year we talked a bit about this issue at our global session. The latest crisis is a multiplier. It's multiplying those risks and shining a spotlight on the broken systems. As vulnerable populations, we're seeing this in our work right now, search for work and economic opportunity, and they're willing to take great risk on employment and migration. And the suffering is real right now. But once restrictions are lifted and economic production resumes, incentives for companies to rapidly scale up production, which can create demand pressure that drives exploitation and unauthorized subcontracting, is likely to dramatically increase and continue exploitation. Companies will rely heavily on informal networks, and knowingly or not, and they must take responsibility for knowing. We must take transformative action now to rebuild better, and I believe the private sector is key. I'm echoing many of the comments that Winnie just made. As governments and civil society continue their work, the private sector must step up and mobilize resources and expertise and forge public-private partnerships and real public-private partnerships where companies come in and help take the risk load at an unprecedented scale. The $70 trillion in global procurement spend can be leveraged to ramp up skilling programs, retrain workers, digitize payments, modernize outdated labor recruitment systems, rapidly pinpoint risks of exploitation, and then take real action to mitigate those risks. So look, there were cracks in the supply chain long before COVID, and the private sector has a vested interest in cleaning up supply chains, retraining workers, paying living wages, providing healthy and working environments, providing worker voice mechanisms, and improving the safety, efficiency, and sustainability of their operations. Responsible investors don't get off the hook either. They're looking at these issues more than ever and can direct trillions of dollars to companies that take meaningful action. Look, I come to this discussion from 35 years, although it seems like yesterday, in the private sector, managing one of the world's largest supply chains, and have remained active in the private sector on company boards, while also serving as a founder and chair of the board of the Global Fund to End Modern Slavery. I view this moment through the lens of the untapped power of the private sector to drive change at scale in partnership with governments and civil society. We must incentivize that action, and we must hold the business world to account, hold them accountable. At the Global Fund, for just a second, we view modern slavery as a crime of economic opportunity, driven by a supply of vulnerable populations and demand for cheap goods and services. Current estimates indicate over 40 million victims, but as a hidden crime, we know this estimate is a gross undercounting and generates at least 150 billion in criminal profits. And we know again that that's a low estimate. That was done by the ILO in 2012. We're in an extreme need to recalculate that to understand the flow of corrupt money. It sits at the intersection of global challenges like national security, organized crime, climate change, migration, to name a few. And modern slavery is not only a derivative of those trends, but fuels many of those trends. We at the Fund are working to build true partnerships with governments and civil society to pool resources and co-develop actionable solutions. Let me just give you a couple of those. Build pathways for safe migration. We must do that. Migration can be safe. We need to work to transform outdated labor recruitment systems that leave the door wide open to unethical recruiters. The private sector can demand and support changes in those systems. We're applying machine learning and artificial technology and all sorts of technology to help companies rapidly detect and mitigate risks of forced labor in their supply chains. The private sector, again, must be responsible for this. And we're using that same technology to fight online sex trafficking. After COVID, online sex trafficking of children exploded, and we are yet to deal with that directly. And we're leveraging the financial sector platform and expertise to identify and disrupt illicit financial flows. We have to take this to the criminals and to the traffickers. So I hope I haven't gone too long, but in closing, let me just say that the private sector champions have to work hand in hand with governments and civil society around the world. And they have a responsibility to drive real and sustainable change and take on the risk with the rest of the world and create this, and I love this, Winnie, a care economy. I'm gonna adopt that and steal relentlessly from your talk. We need leaders to step forward. We need heroic leaders to step forward now. So thank you very much. Back to you, Madam President.
Thank you, Jean. That was a wonderful presentation, and it is good to have the voice of business and of the private sector present here. Money does make the world go round in many ways, and it's important for us to see how we can influence it from other directions and from other sectors, so that all our needs in the end get answered. Rovshan, how are we doing with our friend Jeffrey? If we're not, then I think we should be putting on the video that we have been happy to obtain from Dr. Kerry Kennedy, who is president of the Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights Organization, a human rights activist, a person who has a wonderful program called Speak Truth to Power. Are we able to get the video now?
Yes.
Hi, I'm Kerry Kennedy, and I'm the president of Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights. I also sit on the board of the Nizami Punjabi International Center, along with Vyra and Ismail, and I'm so happy to be here with Rovshan. The world faces extraordinary threats, all colliding at once. The COVID pandemic, recession, which will leave millions jobless and homeless, education losses, which will cost countless skills, that will result in a 1.5% drop in global economic output for the rest of the century and lead to abject poverty for generations. And then, of course, climate disaster. In the midst of this disruption, populism fueled by hate threatens the very structures of governance, trade, and most especially human rights. In the face of all of this destruction and the forces of evil, it is tempting to retreat into despair. But the difference between a victim and a hero is activism with a loving heart. And I think this is a moment when people are yearning to take back control of their lives and willing to sacrifice for a better world, a world based on dignity and compassion. We see that with healthcare workers putting their lives at risk for the sake of the ill. We see it with opera singers leaning out of balconies singing arias at precisely 6 p.m. each night in Italy, and in New Yorkers banging pots across Brooklyn in support of first responders. And we see that with tens of thousands of Americans, Black and white, Latinx and Indian and more, marching together against anti-Black violence and their colleagues around the world. And we hear it with the women and men and children expressing agonizing pain, yes, but also expressing love with extraordinary honesty. Albert Camus said, "In the midst of winter, I found there was within me an invincible summer." And that makes me happy, where it says that no matter how hard the world pushes against me, within me there's something stronger, something better, pushing right back. Our quest is to harness the invincible summer within all of us and push right back. Thank you very much.
We're grateful to Kerry Kennedy for her passion and her commitment. She follows her causes with all her heart and soul, and she's able to bring so many of us along. We will have to work, Roshan, on the technology. The technology partly replaces what presidents can do, but it must be working properly. And maybe we can get a new recording with the sound on, available maybe as streaming or something like that. We do have another video message. Are we ready for that? We have a video message from the Right Honorable Gordon Brown. As you all know, he was Prime Minister of the United Kingdom from 2007 to 2010, a leader of the Labour Party, and he has been kind enough to send us a video greeting.
This conference, organized by the Nizami Ganjavi International Center and by all those who staff it, is not simply a celebration of 75 years of the United Nations, the organization created in the aftermath of the Second World War to bring both international peace and prosperity, but is also a recognition of the challenges we face. For a world that has global problems that needs global solutions, for a world that needs to come together to face up to problems that we share together, for a world that recognizes that prosperity to be sustained has also got to be shared. 75 years ago, when the United Nations was in the process of being formed, we recognized that we had to work together. We had mutual needs, we had common interests, we had shared values. Now we have to rediscover that again. Let's look at it this way. We face the same virus hitting every country in every continent. We face today the same need for a cure and the same need for a vaccine. We face the same need for personal protective equipment and for doctors, nurses, and health service professionals that are properly trained for the task. We face the same need to cooperate in every continent if we're going to solve this problem. And we also face the same kind of economic recession. We face the same problems with the adaptation to new technology. We face the same climate change crisis. We face the same threat of nuclear proliferation. all of us face the need to deliver and deal with the Sustainable Development Goals so that we can have a world free of poverty. And we need to get 200 million children who are not in school into school if we're going to achieve our aim that every single child in this generation has the chance to go to school. So we have now to work together. We have got to cooperate. We have got to show solidarity. And this great conference that is being organized today is a desire to point the way forward. The G20 was brought into existence as a leaders group in 2009 to deal with the global financial recession. We need to tell it to work together now to deal with the problems of recovery that we now face. Coordinated monetary and fiscal solutions, debt relief for the poorest countries, the creation of new international currency, the special drawing rights, perhaps 600 billion now, 600 billion later, so that countries have the resources they need to face the health, the education, the economic, the safety net problems that they now face. We need a new solution for the World Trade Organization so that China, America, Europe, and all the countries of the world that would have benefited from the Doha trade round can get to a situation where instead of having no world trade deal for the first time in 50 years, we have the countries of the world working under the same umbrella together. We need to help the IMF become a better surveillance organization and help the World Bank and the United Nations work together to solve the problems that are faced by more than 20 million refugees around the world, 80 million displaced people, the highest number since the Second World War, and of course, large numbers more who are affected by conflict and by the fallout from climate change. All these problems we can solve better if we work together. So let us look at how together leaders from different countries, leaders who've made a difference in the past, leaders who are in power now, can work together to get these solutions and make them happen. You know, we did solve the problem of the ozone layer by working together. We did tackle HIV/AIDS together in all continents and reduced its incidence. We did eliminate smallpox from the world by a united and cooperative effort from the 1970s onwards. We are on the verge of removing polio for good. We are making breakthroughs in tackling malaria and other diseases. We have the chance to do something great on climate change at COP26 next year. I go back to one incident 30, 40 years ago. We had had a space war between America and Russia. It had lasted since the 1940s, the race to get to the moon, people in conflict in one of the most vulnerable parts of our planet. And yet, by the 1980s and 1990s, we had agreed that instead of racing and working against each other, we needed to work together. And we created the International Space Station. Russia, America, 20 other countries, more to be included, working together up there in that outer space, trying to find the secrets that would unlock some of the great possibilities of the world in space. And so you cannot operate that International Space Station without the Russian launchers and without the American space technology on board the space station itself. An example of where former enemies were able, at least on one issue, to work together. And you know, in the 1980s, when Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev started to meet, and before the great Reykjavik meeting that had a nuclear arms reductions contained in its conclusions, Ronald Reagan, who was interested in Star Wars, said to Mikhail Gorbachev, if an asteroid were to fell on the Earth and hit America, would you come to our aid? Of course, said Gorbachev. We too, said Reagan. It is a we tooism we now need. Global problems need global solutions. Global cooperation, the only way forward. This great international center is built around the principle that we do best when we work together instead of working on our own. Let us make sure we can persuade the whole of the world that the need to work together is greater now than ever. And let's make sure that it happens in the next few years. Thank you.
Minister Gordon Brown, the Nizami Ganjavi International Center is privileged to have Prime Minister Brown join our ranks. He has been extremely active in recent months in issuing statements and declarations, circulating them, with the intent of presenting them to the G20 leaders and distributing them in various other ways. And he has received huge amounts of support from both current and former leaders, intellectuals, specialists around the world. It's a true privilege to have him among us. I am still waiting to see whether we have our friend Jeffrey Sachs among us at the moment or not.
Jeffrey is here, sorry. He is here. He was just...
He just walked in?
He just walked in, yes.
He just walked in.
Yeah.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, hello, Jeffrey.
Hi, how are you?
We have been having a very exciting morning, afternoon, whatever, where you happen to be on the planet. We're very happy to see you. You're a very, very busy man. Need I introduce Dr. Jeffrey Sachs, whom everybody knows, especially those who read his daily columns. He is a university professor and director of the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia University, a special advisor to the Secretary General of UN on SDG, this secretary and the previous one as well, a man of many parts, whose opinions you can read every day. Jeffrey, we are so happy that you made it. Welcome among us. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I apologize for coming late. I was listening to the Secretary General just now for the opening of the General Assembly and to President Trump and President Xi to try to assess a little bit where we are.
You are forgiven for giving them precedence.
No, it's not precedence, but I thought that trying to gauge where things are is important. You know, my general feeling is that too much depends on the US politics in the next few weeks, because I regard Trump as a danger to the global peace and to humanity. And the outcomes, therefore, politically in the United States make a huge difference. So I wanted to listen and see what Trump said. He was his usual vulgar self, I'm afraid, boasting about $2.5 trillion of military spending, our arms more powerful than it ever in history. This is peace through strength. And he spoke a lot about peace in a way that demagogues do, blaming China for unleashing the virus this year, blaming the WHO, which he said is virtually controlled by China, then blaming China for global pollution, for overfishing, for toxic mercury, and for carbon emissions that are twice the level of the United States, without noting that the US emissions are twice the level of China per person, and absolutely without control. If I understand Trump's speech, it is mainly to appeal to the Christian evangelical community in the United States. It was, I think, entirely a domestic speech for the election. The right-wing fundamentalist white evangelical community is xenophobic, anti-China, and anti-Iran. And so this was an agenda that is really the US foreign policy agenda of this group, which is probably half the Republican base in the United States. And I thought it was a domestic campaign speech. President Xi spoke, I thought, very well. He called for avoiding Cold War, avoiding new blocs, avoiding the traps of nationalism and isolationism, called for respecting diversified culture around the world, said that the world will never return to isolation, that we need balanced development that faced up to the gaps between rich and poor, the gaps between government and market, the gaps between countries around the world, all of which made sense to me. And then he made an announcement that was, I thought, quite consequential, not quite good enough, but in advance, where he said that China would commit to climate neutrality by the year 2060. Now, this strikes me as an important advance because it's the first time that I know of, at least, where China has set a goal for reaching zero net emissions. And up until now, China has only talked about the peak year of emissions or emissions intensity. But this is the first time that China has said what means reaching net zero emissions. And the date was set at 2060. The good news is, given China's methods of governance, this will now be incorporated into the coming 14 five-year plan. It will become a national goal, and that is actually quite important. The bad news is, to my mind, it's not good enough because mid-century is the right standard, and we should not have slippage by the #1 aggregate emitter in the world to a later date. And so I was just trying to puzzle out how to move an advance into an even bigger advance by praising it, but not letting the 2060 date get hardened because it will not be sufficient to achieve the 1.5 degree target. And if China were given to 2060 in some normative sense, poorer countries will demand till 2070 or 2080, and we will lose any chance of holding diplomatically and normatively to the 1.5 degree C goal, which is crucial because even that goal is not good enough for human safety, but we can't have it slip away by a piecemeal approach that could undermine it. So in sum, the morning was, to my view, and Secretary General, by the way, spoke very, very well, very clearly about all the major themes and dangers in the world without naming names. So I thought, unfortunately, this morning made some advance by this commitment of China with this double edge. And Trump was Trump. If he stays in power, we will not have peace. We will not have stability. We will not control the pandemic. We will not have multilateralism that is at all effective. So the stakes, in my view, are very high. It's premature to say what to do, but I think we need two strategies. One in which there is a new government in the United States where there's lots of chance actually for reestablishing cooperation, and one where there's Trump, where we will have to have a method of global politics in which the most powerful country is hostile and absent from cooperation and is making threats and feeling xenophobic. Trump said, by the way, that the world's out to punish America. It is a kind, I didn't catch exactly the phrase, but it is the kind of paranoia that exists in a certain part of American politics right now. So it's quite dangerous, and he represents that salient quite powerfully. So this is really our situation. There's lots of grievance in the world. Bolsonaro spoke about the grievance of Brazil not being recognized for the great environmental force that it is. President Erdogan spoke about all the grievances of the Eastern Mediterranean. Trump spoke about the world wanting to punish America. Only China didn't speak about grievances. It was a very typical China speech, I would say multilateral. The only grievance that he mentioned is that some countries are trying to create a new Cold War, which was unacceptable, but he didn't name which country that is. So this is our world right now. And I think the next few weeks are going to be quite astounding.
Thank you, Jeffrey, for this report from the front lines, which could have been more encouraging, but it is what it is, and the world will have to deal with it. Our next speaker is from the home country, Azerbaijan. The Nizami Ganjavi Center has just been joined by a new team member, our new CEO, Mr. Elnur Aliyev. He was formerly a diplomat at the Azerbaijani embassy at the United Arab Emirates. Mr. Aliyev, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Thank you very much, Madam President. I would like to apologize in the beginning for joining you a bit late. I was just coming from another meeting. So as I'm joining from Azerbaijan, I would like just share our perception, what's happening globally. And I think that one of the major trends that we are witnessing now is revival type of regionalism. As Mr. Sachs mentioned, the US is pulling back from the global cooperation. This is very important and very critical, I think, trend that is happening at the moment. And with the effect of the coronavirus, what we see that the regionalization in the form that what's happening within the region is decided and influenced mostly by the region without having the global solution or the globally voiced issues. For example, if you look at what's happening in the Mediterranean, it's in fact a global issue, but the approach and the solutions are trying to be found on a regional level. Same is happening, for example, on Eastern Europe. What's happening in Ukraine, what's happening in the moment in the South Caucasus. We see that there is and when we talk about multilateralism, I think that today the tendency is about regionalism, because multilateralism can be looked at as a global phenomenon when the UN is more active, when the global powers are feeling the responsibility over the global issues, and that's how regional issues are becoming global. So today, I think there is a type of pulling back of the global responsibilities of those who can bear these global responsibilities. And many issues are left at the regional level. And this is, I think that if the global power is trying to play an important role in maintaining the global values in all corners of the world, at least in the major corners of the world, the other forces which can be detrimental to the regional cooperation and to the regional, in fact, stability, as the global powers are pulling out, the regional forces are filling this vacuum. That's why I think that the recent events, that even the Ukraine, from our perspective, is one of the embodiment of this tendency. And as I think that with the COVID, what's happening with the COVID, that the countries are the countries are closed, but they're opening up again, first of all, at the regional level. And even the movement of the people are now mostly recovering at the regional level. And what we see now, that even the countries which are, if we look at the globe, and the globe is divided in the regions, so the countries are approaching the regional cooperation and regional issues from different perspective now. And it's very difficult to understand what is the underlying reason for this. For example, as I'm speaking from Azerbaijan, what we have seen in July, the escalation on the border is very much was unexpected from our side, and still there is no clear understanding what's going to happen next in the region, at least in our region, in our borders. So I think that as we talk about global context, we should also look at the regions as the part of the global picture, because at the moment we don't see that the global multilateralism in terms of the UN cooperation can deliver the solutions at the regional level. And then as we are proceeding further, we see that the Chinese role is changing, and the Chinese perception itself in the global forum, in the global context, is changing. But how this change are affecting the different regions, and what is the interest of China towards different regions? Is it something which can counterbalance absence of the, for example, United States from the same context, or what the emerging power of China and the pulling back of the states from the globally important issues, what this change, what this major two trends can bring to the specific regions. This is very important, but unfortunately we don't see the balanced approach in terms of trying to deliver globally accepted, let's say, principles and the globally accepted norms at the regional level. So my point, my intervention will be more related to how the regions are perceived today from the global perspective, from the UN perspective, and how the solutions at the regional level will be construed in a form, what cooperation will lead to the solution to the specifically long-standing regional issues.
Thank you, Mr. Lear. I think that was a valuable reminder that when we talk about multilateralism, it is not a distribution of power equally among all countries, not by any means, and that both in terms of power and of needs and requirements, different parts of the world have different needs and needs for different solutions. Thank you very much for your presentation. We will have now, as a concluding speaker and making some concluding and summing up remarks, whichever he prefers, my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Ismail Serageldin. Everybody knows him as a former vice president of the World Bank, but maybe more so as the founding and long-time director of the reborn Bibliotheca Alexandrina in Alexandria, Egypt. He's been a faithful supporter of Nizami Ganjavi in all his aspects, and always reminding us of his contribution as a Muslim scholar, not just as an ancient Persian poet, but most of all, he's a man of the world and a patriot of humanity. Ismail, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam President. This has been, I must say, an exceptionally rich discussion with many insights. And in terms of summing up, I wouldn't dream of being able to do justice to all, but I will indeed remind us that Mr. Šefik, President of Bosnia-Herzegovina, also talked about regional issues and how we needed to pay attention to them. And I myself earlier today, in response to a question, did remind people that the world owes the various countries attention to the so-called frozen conflicts. Nagorno-Karabakh, of course, is one of them, but it's not the only one, as you all know. I think President Tarja Halonen reminded us of the gender issues and how we must defend a rule-based multilateral system. So how does that link with what our colleague Elnur just said about a regional perspective? Well, we must have a rule-based system because otherwise each regional geographic unit will be dominated by a local hegemon. And the ability of smaller countries to get justice done in an international system must be by the willingness of one and all to adhere to a rules-based system. And that, of course, is what the United Nations stands for. In fact, it is what we should have networks. That was David Navarro's comments about how these collaborative working networks need women and youth and participation in order to promote community action, so even smaller than the region within countries, but to pursue the SDGs seriously and remember to value the poor as our fellow human beings. Jeff, in terms of talking about evangelicals and Christians, I think one of the great phrases that some of these people should be reminded is there, but for the grace of God goes I. I mean, that is a fundamental value, and they should be willing, in fact, to think of that when you look at the families being separated at the border, people who walked 1,200 miles to come to the United States and then are thrown in cages, et cetera, that you know only too well. But David, I think, rightly said that the narrative is that we have a serious challenge that has been underestimated at our own risk. And we must, in fact, take the virus very seriously. And Winnie, she told us a lot that we should not go back to vaccine nationalism, that health is a human right, it's a universal and basic care. Everybody should have that business as usual is unacceptable, that we need tax reform, and we need to address the debt of the poor countries and promote peace. And look at the governance of the multilateral system, not just the governance of the individual governments and so on. Now, Jean Bader-Schneider, I must say I'm so delighted to know more about your campaign to end modern slavery. That is so true. And your emphasis on the cycle of collapse and rebuild, labor mobility, free trade, etc., and how much the private sector can do. Regretfully, I wish the private sector would do more, but in many cases, it has been enriching a few individuals at phenomenal rates through stock options, stock repurchases, and things of that kind, rather than bringing the talent and ability of the private sector to address the global problems. And that, I think, is something that we should be seeing in our effort to weave together the different strands of perceptive politics and committed, productive private sector, as well as persistent science, in order to bring solutions to the world's problem. And I share the view of Gordon Brown and Kerry Kennedy that yes, compassion is needed, as Kerry said, but Gordon Brown is right to remind us of past successes. Yes, we did move from the competition of the Cold War to the collaboration of the International Space Station. We did see many examples of global collaboration, from ozone to AIDS, to smallpox, to polio, to malaria. And now we must bring that to bear on the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals and addressing the challenges of climate change. We have seen how the lockdowns resulted in a reduction in air pollution, with a return of the birds in certain places that we hadn't even heard in a long time, etc. But surely there must be a way to achieve that without the enormous costs of putting people out of work and putting families unable to put food on the table. So that we must, in fact, find a way of bringing people to work together on that. And Jeff, I think you reminded us that the world is not yet on a consensus, and that we need to think more about how we're going to do this. And yes, you are right in seeing an advance in President Xi talking about 2060, but zero net emissions for China by 2060 invites a slippage by others, which is going to require a redoubling of our efforts at adaptation as well as in emissions control. And that is not easy. And my good friend Elnur did talk about various cases, including Ukraine, Caucasus, Eastern Mediterranean, and reminded us that there is a changing attitude where countries can see their interests mapped onto regional basis. But this is a moment, it's a very special moment. It's a moment where, like in the sci-fi movies, you have a common enemy for all of humanity, a non-human common enemy for all of humanity. And surely this should be an invitation for all of us to collaborate across political boundaries, across political attitudes, towards ensuring that the advances that we can make, whether it be in tests or therapeutics or vaccines to fight with this alien virus, are made available to all those who need it, not just those who can afford it, to buy it. We need to find that. And also, Jeff, you and I have been in the development economics for a very long time. We have to recognize that we need, I think, of debt forgiveness for many of the countries, simply pushing back $11 billion in repayment by the poorest countries, saying, we won't take your savings right now, but maybe in 6 months' time, we will take your savings back from the poorest countries, is really not acceptable at a time when we can generate trillions of dollars for the citizens of the rich world. I'm not against generating the trillions of dollars for the citizens of the rich world. I am against taking away the savings of the poorest countries for debt repayments at a time of this collective crisis. We also, I think, need to think boldly about the idea which Gordon Brown mentioned. I also, and some friends mentioned also, that just as the US Federal Reserve could generate more dollars, the EU could generate more euros. Well, surely we can generate more SDRs, special drawing rights at the IMF. I mean, this is another case where we can have a global currency generated in a way that helps some of the poorest countries around the world. And we can do it on a scale that could reach $1 trillion or SDRs very quickly. But that kind of bold, innovative thinking cannot be done by local nationalism or by local regional perspectives. We need a global consensus that this needs to be done. And as we were able, and you were able, and others were able to get the countries of the world to commit to the SDGs in 2015,
Are they cutting us off because it's an hour and a half since we started?
I think the sound. Okay, now it's normal. Osman, can you unmute?
We lost the sound entirely.
No, I'm here, but I just wanted to say thank you. I have finished overview and summation. As I said at the beginning, I don't think I could do a complete summation for everything, but at least I think I was able to touch upon the take-home messages that each and every one of you has made. Thank you.
Thank you, Ismail. We lost you for a moment there, and I was wondering whether the technical underpinnings of this event were being extremely punctual about the time that they felt they were allotting to us. May I, while we still can, thank you most heartily for your participation. These have been most interesting and varied presentations. We very much look forward to continuing the debate tomorrow, series continuing with the regional debates and thematic debates, and a concluding session. Thank you very much for being with us. And I hope that out in cyberspace, there are people who are listening, and if they have comments or questions to address us, by all means, send them to the Nizami Ganjavi International Center in Baku, and I'm sure that everybody will be thrilled to answer you. Thank you to everybody. Good morning, good night, keep well, keep healthy. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.